President Yejide, could you introduce yourself and your organization?
Sure. I'm Yejide Orunmila. I am the president of the African National Women's Organization, which is a pretty new organization. For the past 3 years, I've been the president, and it's an international membership-based organization that is responsible for bringing Black women around the world into political life, struggling for power for Black people everywhere.
And that is one arm of the Greater Socialist Party that you work with. So how does your organization fit in with the overall movement?
Sure. So the African People's Socialist Party is the overarching party that leads all of the Uhuru movement. And so the movement has several different organizations to deal with specific issues. Obviously, the African National Women's Organization targets or highlights the contradictions that are evident because of colonial exploitation, and how it really implicates or causes contradictions in the lives of African women specifically. This is not to negate any other issues from across the African nation, but we also understand that there are specific types of oppressions that happen to African women. And so there are other organizations. There's another one called the All African Peoples Development and Empowerment Project. And their responsibility is to focus on agriculture, healthcare, and education. And they organize the skilled sector of the African population, people who have not engineering, healthcare workers, whatever else, and causing them to use their skills to build up African communities around the world. And then there's the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, and they are just in the streets every day. You got a problem with your landlord, they're right there in the streets with the people organizing to push back and raise up the leadership of the African working class.
And I read you do a lot of outreach in terms of community development and family activities and that kind of thing as a part of your mission.
Yes. So yeah, we do outreach. We want to focus on like political education because we can do all the outreaches that we can in the community, and we do go out and meet African women and people and men and talk to them about some of the issues that African women are facing. We organize a project called Arrest CPS, which focuses on the high rates of state-sponsored kidnapping of Black children and how it affects Black mothers and Black families. And then we also talk about the Uhuru Kijiji Child Care Collective, which is a project that is basically our response to state-sponsored welfare for African children, where we take on the responsibility ourselves. But in addition to that, we really want to struggle to have political education because it doesn't matter how many projects that we put on the ground, if the people aren't really won politically, then it could just, be undone at any given moment.
And how did you get into this movement? You mentioned it's a new movement, just a couple of years old. How did you first decide to join?
So I actually joined 10 years ago. I first came in through the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project. I was into urban farming and, natural building. And I was like, oh, I want to join the AFDEP because I want to do that sort of thing. So I was an AFDEP for All African People's Development and Empowerment Project for about 4 or 5 years. I was also in the party. I am in the party, the African People's Socialist Party. And so I transitioned out of AFDEP to be the leadership of the African National Women's Organization. So I've been in this movement overall for the last 10 years.
Is it your sense that you can affect a change within the current political structure, or is there something that you feel has to be done outside of that?
Absolutely. I think that regardless of whatever political structure is apparent right now, our responsibility is to help win in the minds of African working class, especially the need for us to have power over our own lives and to actually do away with the current social system, because the current social system emerged as a result of the oppression and the colonialism and enslavement of African people. So in order for us to truly be free as African people, we have to do away with the current social system.
And how would that happen? And what kind of length and what kind of mechanisms would you put in place to do that?
Well, first of all, we have to win in the minds of the people that you have to be free. Because ultimately what we're talking about is making a revolution. And a revolution can't happen as a revolution in the United States. It can't happen as a revolution in Jamaica, where people are from. It can't happen as a revolution in Congo. It has to be a worldwide understanding about what's happening. It's a tall order. And so how we're doing that now is really, we're doing the groundwork right now, is putting out the theory of African internationalism in all of these places. So we have forces who are in Cameroon. We have forces all throughout the United States. We have forces who are in Kenya and South Africa and in Ghana. We have forces who are in Southeast Asia and all throughout Europe and the Caribbean. And so what we're trying to do is lay the groundwork, and we're doing it piece by piece. You know, we have to build branches. We have to have units who are responsible for going out and meeting the people and winning this politically. Because I forget who said it. You can't win a revolution if the people aren't behind you. And so even if we were to take up arms today, if that was something that we were trying to do, like if nobody understands like what's happening, then it would just be over with within a week, you know? And so we have to really struggle, because what we're talking about is a major power shift. What we're talking about is a global power shift that's going to require every African everywhere, or segments of Africans everywhere, to really be united around, you know, what needs to happen.
Do you find in your dealings with Africans who live within the United States, do you find that it's easy to forge commonalities between Africans in the United States and African Americans?
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably wouldn't have been so quick to say that before, only because there is, we talk about class a lot in the African People's Socialist Party. So we have the petite bourgeoisie, is the Africans or Black people who aspire to be like the white bourgeoisie and be exploiters, and don't want to associate or find differences and exploit those differences. And it's the same thing that's going on in Africa right now. You have this particular tribe and that particular tribe, and somebody gets into power and they exploit the differences among the people in order to take advantage. And so I say that to say that when I talk to regular Africans, just regular everyday Africans, whether they're from the continent or from the Caribbean or whatever, that they find commonality. We find commonality in one another. So for example, my family, I'm first generation in the United States. My family is actually from Jamaica and Grenada. And before that, my father's family is linked to Haiti. And before that, obviously Africa. And so when I go to South America, when I went to Colombia, I'm on the beach and these Africans are coming to me like, yes, you're my sister. And they automatically link with me. And the same here, like if you just take out all the fluff and all of these colonial attitudes, it's easy to talk to African people who just want to be free and have issues just like you and want to see Black people come together.
What would the freedom look like? Like if you could be in charge tomorrow, like how would you exactly engineer sort of a different social structure or political structure?
I'm glad you asked that. I've been thinking about that so much in like the last week. And so there's a couple of things. Because, you know, I'm president of the African National Women's Organization. Obviously, we have to do a lot of work to ensure that African women are brought out of the status that they are. A lot of places that we're talking about, African women are on the lowest subset of society doing the grunt work. And so we have to make sure that we have a widespread education campaign. We have to ensure that every African woman is employed, has some employable income, because if they're not, then what happens is that they're easily exploited in the society. The men still have control over them in a certain kind of way and dictate how they get to move. And African women who have resources have different choices that they have to make and have more freedom, and they won't be trapped in these old ways. And then also I would think about like obviously the redistribution of the wealth in Africa, of course. And so this is where we I would just shut off the IMF and World Bank, honestly. I would just like, we're not paying you back any loans. We're going to use our resources, you know, to build roads. We have to electrify the entire country. We have to use the resources that's in here to power, because Africa has so much resources that's being taken out of there that if I was the president, like of Africa, right, like I would just make sure that we start looking at how we can internalize these resources and do a rapid development. And that also requires like the education of the people. It will require using whatever genius that are already inherent in our people and try to develop technology. Because African people, there's like, I've just seen some ingenious things with little to no resources that if given an opportunity to work for the development of a united Africa and bring up, across so many different solutions. Like if given an opportunity, I think that we would just flourish. There's so much more, and I'm probably like all over the place, but I'm just like, there's a whole bunch of things in my mind right now.
Yeah, and I imagine there is a lot of difference between the people in the different countries of Africa
Yeah,
that would need to be
absolutely.
bridged. How would you work things in the United States? I wonder, for one thing, like,
Mm-hmm.
and ideally, if you could switch things around, how would the different races mix?
Mm.
If you were creating an ideal society.
If I would, I think that first of all, we have to acknowledge in this country that it was built on rape and pillage and capitalist exploitation. And I find it very difficult in my mind to think about how that would be. The difficulty in it is that when you wrench that from the very system that created itself, it's going to be horrible for the people, white people. I think for people who have been oppressed, given an opportunity, we all want peace. Nobody wants to fight. Nobody wants to have their family or friends or anything. But outside of that, I don't know how that could happen, to shift power and to wrench power back for people who have been impoverished and marginalized for hundreds and hundreds of years. So in the United States, I think that first we have to do a lot of political education. Like the chairman has done something really spectacular, I think, more than any other group, which is that even within the Uhuru movement, there is a sector of the movement that has white people. They're called the African People's Solidarity Committee. They're white people who organize for Black Power. They actually go into the white community and organize for reparations to African community, and they get it. They get hundreds of thousands of dollars. In addition, they also do a lot of political education and win hundreds of white people to understand that they're sitting on a pedestal of oppression. They're sitting on a pedestal of exploitation and killing and murders and killing and rape and all of this stuff, and wins them politically to understanding that in order for that to stop, that we have to have support, we have to have the leadership of the oppressed, and they have to be okay with that. And the fact that it's working, that 40 years ago there was one person and now there's hundreds of white people who are a part of this organization, shows that it has the premise to be something that we can use not only here in America, but everywhere else, like in European metropoles and other places, to shift the way that people understand equality and living in peace with people.
So just going back to your last point, so do you think that this might end in an actual more a civil war, or sort of a military revolution for it to work?
I personally don't see how not. That's because I don't think that there's going to be a voting process. I think that there are ways for people who are radical and revolutionary to be a part of the voting process. I'm not inferring that that's what you meant, but I know that outside of that, people really look to that as a way to shift power. And so I think that there are ways that you can, on the platform of just staunch revolutionary radical stuff, just say, this is what I'm for, and you just want people to vote for you, and then you might win. But I think ideally what we're talking about is a power shift, right? And a power shift doesn't happen in the way that we're talking about without some sort of revolution. And that revolution oftentimes comes with some struggle, and struggle that sometimes ends in bloodshed. And I'm not saying that we're anywhere near there, but I think that in order for Black people to realize freedom for real, that nowhere on earth has anybody gotten their freedom through nonviolent struggle. That's the reality.
Going towards presidential politics, do you see a difference between the last several presidents in terms of the current president, Trump, Obama before him, George Bush, the second George Bush before him? Do you see these politicians as being more connected, or do you see a difference in terms of how they speak to the elements of your movement?
I think politically, every U.S. president is one to imperialism, and they may wear it differently. So, Trump doesn't care. Like, he is reckless. He'll say what he wants to say. He doesn't have any filter. And I think that's kind of refreshing for me, because I think when people, like, for example, for Obama, like, everybody were not everybody, but there was a large segment, especially of the African population in the United States, who was won over by his black face, by the fact that he was singing Al Green, or that he has a jump shot, or things like that. But we're only looking at his policies, like all of his policies. So right now we're really upset with Donald Trump because he says he wants to build a wall and separating families. But Obama was a deporter in chief. Like, he deported the most people. Mexicans were leaving the United States by droves because of the policies that he implemented, and still his legacy lives on through this process. He allowed for a Trump to come in and try to facilitate many of the policies that he has now. And so, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I had a sense from some of the last, particularly the immigration, that the focus in the Obama administration may have been on undocumented immigrants who had done some other thing, committed some other crime, whereas now maybe the focus is shifted to just simply getting rid of undocumented immigrants just merely for being in the country. Do you have a sense of that shift, or is it basically, do you have a sense that it's basically the same now as it was under Obama?
I think it's the same, only because I work with people who are in the immigration justice field, and the stories of women who are trying to escape rape or death because somebody in Mexico threatened them and they're trying to get asylum here, didn't matter. There was no asylum. It's not only, and that's just one case, and children who are being separated from their parents. That's still the same thing that was happening during the 8 years that Obama was in office. So I think that what we're dealing with right now, though, is that there is more publicity around it. There's more talk around it. There's more people who are aggravated by it, because when the same things were happening during Obama, nobody was up in the street talking about this and that. Actually, if you remember, there was a DACA protest back then as well, because DACA was getting some status for children who could stay in the United States during President Obama, because this was a very big deal back then, just the immigration status of children and parents. And so I think overall, like, it's all wrapped up in a bubble, and I just don't want to focus on Obama and Trump as a comparison. But I was, the Bushes are terrible, horrible policies. The Clintons, the first Black president, they're the worst policies. Him and his wife. So like I said, I think that all U.S. presidents are really aligned with imperialism, and it's very difficult to really go up into that system and say, oh, because he's Black or because he's Latino or whatever, that somehow he's going to be on our side. The reality is that when you become the U.S. president, you become the chief imperialist in charge, and no matter the color of your skin. And actually, Obama actually dropped more bombs on the continent of Africa than any other president. He has gone to Africa and said some disparaging remarks to Africans, went to a Black college in the United States, I can't remember the names right now, and just said, if you just pull up your pants, it's these sorts of things that kind of like really lambast, African people. And yeah, so I just think that they're your chief imperialist in charge if you're a U.S. president.
Talk about, maybe, obviously things have changed in the country since segregation and slavery before that. Talk about the way in which you talked about African Americans being enslaved. How does that manifest itself in present day?
Okay, yeah. So I think I know that there are so many systems that have emerged out of enslavement of people, of African people, not just people. And of course, like, the prison system is the prison or justice system is created out of the need to enslave or keep African people or, under the foot of the government. I mean, obviously the numbers of Black people in prison right now is indicative of that sort of ongoing criminal justice as aimed at the people, the unwanted people in this country. Certainly that the state-sponsored kidnapping of African children is a part of the long history of the theft of African children, taking Black children from mothers, commodifying Black people through the birth of the womb. And now we have, disproportionate amounts of Black children who are in foster care in the state. Certain states get federal funding for the amount of children that are in foster care. So those are just two of the ways.
Is that you're talking like in our country, or African children, coming in and being adopted by American parents? Or is
I'm
it
talking primarily. I'm talking about this country. This disproportionate amounts of Black children, African children in this country, who are born here, who are from African parents who are born here, are in foster care. That is a good point that you're raising too, because it can also extend to what's happening on the continent and in the Caribbean. I mean, if we just remember after the hurricane in Haiti, where we had the story that came across the news where these so-called missionaries were like stealing children out of the country. There was a story of a white woman who couldn't wait for the adoption process to be done, and actually took I think a 2-year-old baby from Haiti, stuffed her in her bag, and flew all the way to France. I don't know what happened to this lady, but somebody on the plane was just like, "What's in your bag?" And they found a baby in there. I mean, these are the ways that our children are lost, are sold, are kidnapped, and this is happening not just in the United States in the legal way, but in all of the other illegal ways that around the world.
How does it happen in the United States? Are you talking about a scenario where mothers are pressured not to keep their children, or a situation where social service somehow intervenes?
I'm talking about social service. I'm talking about even through the whole abortion process, or the right to life, or not right. And listen, I'm for a woman's right to choose, but I think that there are social conditions that force a right to to do certain types of things. But I'm also talking primarily around the social service issue. In the 2 years that I've been working on the Arrest CPS campaign, I've spoken to dozens of mothers from the U.S., from the U.K., from Sweden, in the metropoles, like these major cities around the world, and the stories are all the same. Because poverty leads to not having enough access, what happens is that these children may have come in contact with a social worker, and the mother is poor. She may be dealing with some contradictions herself, and
You mean like
but the state,
substance abuse and those kind of things?
it's hardly ever substance abuse. It's really mostly only poverty, and it's never
Financial.
it's hardly ever violence either. Children aren't removed because the parents are violent. Children are not removed because the parents are on drugs for the most part. It's because of poverty, which can breed in a whole bunch of other things. But I think but the fact that the state never helps these parents get it right. The first, and even as a mother cleans herself up and goes through the whole process, it's a struggle to get those children back. Where in the contradict in opposite of that, we see now that these white women who were, I don't know, I call them like granola. They they're kind of hippie-ish. They had 5 adopted Black children. They had trouble in one state, so they moved to another one, and they drive their children off of a cliff into the water. Yet these women, who obviously have problems, are not. The children are not taken from them. And so what I'm saying is that there's a tendency to criminalize Black mothers. And I'm not saying that sometimes it's not contradictions, because there are. But what system does it that continues to keep the children from the parents? It traumatizes the mother, it traumatizes the children. And so what we have to do, if in my new world, is to try to solve those problems. My responsibility is to try to see how we can keep families together. And right now, the system is not at all, is being paid to keep families apart.
Do you have the numbers as far as what's the racial mix as far as the people that are in the leadership positions in the social service industry, or the social service government organization? And does the social service organizations vary from state to state or community to community?
They do. Actually, when the racial mix, I don't know the numbers. But I do know that a lot of times when these mothers are being confronted about their children, the workers who they're talking to are mostly Black, who are working for the state. And so we can analyze that, and say, look, listen, I would never be a social worker, because I would never want to go into a situation where I got to take somebody's kids away from them. You make a decision when you go in there, and some of these social workers actually do want to help. So, for example, in Philadelphia, which is like the city, the worst city to be in if you're poor and a Black woman with children, because that's the highest rate of children being taken in the city of Philadelphia. If I did outreach in the city of Philadelphia one time and handed out this flyer. I think at this event that probably had about 100 people. Every other person that I spoke to, this is no exaggeration, every other person I spoke to has had contact with the social service system. And so it's really glaring oftentimes, because every time that we raise this issue, there's somebody coming out the woodwork. There's women all the time who said, they took my kids and I'm trying to get them back. I'm going to court. They told me I can't. These lawyers aren't helping me. The court appointed. They can't afford to get real lawyers. So there's a whole thing here that's really associated with poverty. Like if somebody is poor and they want to get their children back, it's really an uphill battle. And we're trying to really raise that up because people are talking about, children being killed in the street, but there's this whole segment of our population of African children that are being kidnapped by the state and the mothers who are being criminalized, and nobody's really talking about that.
If society were to kind of reshuffle, how would things work as far as how should different races intermingle? Should there be different restaurants or different jobs by race? No.
I think that in an ideal world, you would hope that people could actually interact with one another without any prejudices, without any issues at all. And for the most part, in the party, we know that race is a social construct. That race is something that was created by Europeans in order to lord power over people. And so I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to have separate restaurants or eat different foods or interact with each other. That ideally we want to be around each other and not have to deal with issues of exploitation and oppression. And so, yeah, that's basically a goal. Yeah.
Do you think there's any places in the country where things work? I guess you use the term colonial, where things don't work so much in a colonial system, but things work basically sort of how they ought to work. Have you seen any examples or any communities or any areas of the country that you could point at where things are kind of going on the right track?
I don't know. I don't know everywhere in the country. There may be a small pocket somewhere. I don't know. But I think that overall, the system that we're living in is one of domestic colonialism, especially for Black people. So even if there is a place that may exist right next door, it could be a poor, impoverished Black community that is being policed the hell out of that population, or a Black kid that's being told that she can't wear her hair in a natural way to go to school, or a Black boy who has to walk down the street and get his face busted open by a police officer because he don't like the way he wore his pants. I mean, these are like my own daughter, had to experience, her sitting down, chilling with her friends. The police just come up and harass them and punches this boy in the face and carts him off to jail for no reason whatsoever. I mean, I think that that even if there's a pocket somewhere that exists where there's some sort of utopia and everybody is getting along, it doesn't mean anything if the whole entire system, the whole entire society is not reflecting in that same way.
And then what would be like a specific step to fix that part of things?
Can you be a little bit more specific?
Like, let's talk about the police issue. Do you think that, I wonder what you think about the variation between supervision among different police forces. And I wonder if you think that if there could be a way to live stream video footage and have that come from each police officer, that would move in a good direction as far as police oversight.
Well, then you have to look at all the video that we have seen where police knew that they were being videoed and they carried video on them and still shot, killed, murdered people right in front of camera that got shot all over social media. And I don't think that because the police itself is a gang, they want to protect their own. And I don't see anywhere, and I haven't heard of anywhere in the country where the police are something that somebody's getting what's the word I'm looking for, what they're due for doing criminal activity, right? For killing human beings, for killing somebody's child, mother, father, whoever. And so I think that the oversight, what we talk about in this movement in particular, is having Black community control of police. Until we get free, if police are going to be in our community, then the community has to be able to say who can police our community, how they could police our community. And if they don't police the community in a way that we need them to police, then we are going to get them fired. or they will be fired because we will have the ability to do that. And so, like, I was looking at a video just shortly before I came on here of a sister in Newark, New Jersey, who was raising, all these questions around why the Newark Council people weren't doing this and that, and she was calling for there to be police because the children, there was 45 missing kids in the city of Newark, New Jersey, and nobody knew. There was bodies, being found, and the city was too dark for us. And for a community, it could be, I want the police to install lights or to make sure that these lights are on in this community. I want the police to escort my children from point A to point B. I don't want the police to harass my children, beat up my children, and things like that. So how do we get to the point where we can have Black community control of police? That is also an organizing question. That's also a political one that could be won or lost in a political election like we were struggling for in St. Petersburg, Florida. But we can also be doing like the grassroots stuff. There's always this wall between community oversight boards, right? Like they oversight the police, has no power whatsoever. It's like the community is watching, but community has always been watching, and nothing has really changed. People's children are still dying. Situations become out of control. So I think overall, what we're trying to struggle for right now is just the Black community of control of police issue. We also are struggling for Black political radical candidates to enter into these political races so that we can do a couple of things. Politicize the hell out of people through our campaign. If you win, like radicalize the whole thing as much as you can and get out of there, having done something for the community. And we want to use that as an example for other Black politicians and any politicians that said they're for the people as a I'm losing words today, but as an example for anybody who says they want to impact the community, whether that's through policing or through politics.
Do you think there's much of a difference when it's a Black police chief in a certain area versus a white police chief? And do you have a sense there's some unified direction that goes to all police forces across the country?
Yeah, I think what we're dealing with is that for us, we understand the police is the police, whether they have a Black face, the Asian face, white face, the police are there to police the community. They're not there. I think that there are so-called minority groups who enter the police force because they want to do something to help the community. They may go in with all the good intentions. And there's actually a group of Black police, I think there's a fraternity of like Black police officers who come together and say, this is what's happening to us, or this is what's happening to community. But that hasn't, halted, what's happening in these communities and halt the police. It's just a Black face on a force that's being used in the community where there are Black faces. And for the most part, that I think that would anger that community even more. It's enraging them more. And we've seen that through some of these protests where, Black people are coming up to the faces of these Black officers and saying, you should be ashamed of yourself. What are you standing here for? Because people, they recognize the police is not their friend when they're on the opposite side of the barricade.
So if you talked about a redistribution of wealth, how would you deal with so if you look back throughout the history of the country, which starts with taking land from the Native Americans, it goes on through slavery and segregation. How would you reconcile that with, say, people living now that weren't themselves a part of the segregation slavery movement?
Mm-hmm. Well,
how would you tell them that, like, okay, your money needs to go to somebody else? How would you make a case for that?
Well, the white people in our movement really do amazingly, right? But the chairman of Omali Eshatella, who's the chairman of our entire movement, has really given them the tools to help them say, listen, you sit on the pedestal of what your ancestors and your foreparents have taken from Native Americans, Africans, Southeast Asians. Your wealth comes from that. Your social wealth comes from that. there's this whole society that was created around the greatness of white people and what white people can accomplish, and by denigrating every other group. And so there's a social wealth that comes along with that. And so even the poorest white person who is in the Appalachian Mountains, you just clean them up a little bit and give them some slick talking, and they exceed farther than an African, or they can give him more access than an African. So that's the social wealth we're talking about. Because I recognize that not every white person got money for who got family members who are descendants of wealth, but there's that social element of wealth, and that's how I would explain it to them. And then if they're questioning it, and it's like, just give me money anyway, because until you figure it out, because honestly, like, just being in society right now, it's really hard to not really identify that is exactly what's happening.
Do you think that, say there was like using your example, a very poor white family, that they have it easier than, say, a wealthy Black family, which maybe had developed a very successful business over the last couple of generations? Does that person really have it easier in our society?
I think that there is, I think that the fact that they're poor speaks to a number of things. Like, they have the same motivation to upturn this system as even the wealthiest Black family, right? Like, the system, because no matter how wealthy a Black family gets, like, the Black man who might be a millionaire will probably get stopped on the road by the police more than a poor white trash, not a poor white family who lives in the mountains, right? Like, so even in that element, like, they may be poor and they might be obscure, and this Black family might have a little bit more notoriety, but they're still targets at more so than even the poorest white person. But I think when we're talking about poor white people and what they have to gain, when we think about like shifting the whole social system, right? They stand to benefit just as much as any African or any other oppressed person, because obviously their lives are not easy, but their lives could be much better if this whole exploitative parasitic relationship would just end, and we can start to begin to shift to a society that equalizes wealth and distributes it to the place where the people who need it can get it.
Do you, what percentage do you think are there of white people that are, outwardly antagonistic towards Black people versus those that you say who have sort of been beneficiary of the things that came before them?
I wouldn't know the percentages. I do think that being, a person who's been on this planet for at least almost half a decade, right? not half a decade, that'd be 5 years, half a century. That I think the experiences that I've had most often are with well-meaning white people who don't want to be antagonistic, right? Like, the experiences is very, very mindful. And what I mean is that there are ways that somebody who can be very mindful, who can be very thoughtful about their words, can be very condescending and really antagonistic by being passive aggressive. I think especially as a Black woman.
So like a patronizing type of situation.
Yes. And I think if you talk to a lot of Black women who work in office spaces and have to deal with the Becky first character, like, there's a lot of that. Like, there's a lot of antagonism. There's a lot of like belittling, and a lot of that happens that you would say would come from a white person who believes that they're well-meaning. And so even without there being direct like racial slurs and violence, that there is a certain level of disrespect and I think I've used all of the adjectives, certain level of kind of like, really undermining the significance of a person who is a Black woman, or a Black man for that matter.
Have you ever had a white person that you would consider a true friend?
No. I've had colleagues who I was like, yo, she's cool, right? Like, she's a cool person. For example, like, there was this one woman that I work with who in New York, and she has a Black husband now, right? But I remember the situation when Katrina happened, and all these Black people, were being left on roofs to die, floating in rivers. And even her is just like, she just tried to make excuses for the state when, as Black people, we knew like they can get in there if they wanted to. They didn't have to have these people sitting there and doing all this stuff. And I think she, and even if she has this husband and now has Black children and things like that. So I think so no, to answer your question, no, I have not had a white person who was not truly a fan, but I think that I could have one if they would recognize the power, that Black power is necessary, that they can unite with that, and if they were willing to even fight for that. I could have a real good homegirl or homeboy who was really like down for that, who understood that question.
What would you advise like a family member or friend as far as like a romantic relationship with somebody of a different race, a white person or Asian or Hispanic?
I have advised family members. First of all, I don't unite with that. Like I really don't. I actually wrote an article about that on our news engine. It's called the Burning Spear newspaper.com. Is it Burning? I always think. I think it's burningspearnewspaper.com.org. Or theburningspear.org. That's the right URL. And I think overall, like there are people in my family who are not people. There's only one person that I know of who date a white person, and I try to explain to her that the reason that this relationship may, I think part of, let me just back up a little. I think part of the reason this person in my family is okay with that relationship is because she doesn't want to see the differences. She doesn't want to see the fact that that this person is the reason why he can have a relationship with her. The reason why she might even think of him as an optimal mate is because of this long history of, the denigration of Black people, the lives of Black people, and also the fact that, in society overall, white people are seen as better in every way, shape, or form than any other oppressed or colonized person. And so I think that's part of the question. But overall, I struggle, not only with her, but anybody else to like really consider that. And even having a discussion, like a real honest, clear cut discussion with people who have been in relationships with white people, I'm going to say, that there are always things that emerge within these relationships that challenges the very core of who they are. They have to make a decision. Do I love this person enough to ignore what I know impacts me? Or do I jump over it just to appeal to his sensibilities or her sensibilities? And most often, if you see a Black person in that type of relationship, they have to lose a little bit of themselves. And again, this is something that was come out of discussions from people that I know. It might not apply to everybody, but for as far as I understand, that's pretty much the feedback that I've gotten.
What was it like when you were growing up? Was it a diverse community and school that you went to, or was it primarily all Black people?
I think every single school that I've been to have been primarily Black people. I've lived in very urban areas, and so I went to a Sister Clara Muhammad Elementary School in Newark, New Jersey, where it was Black Muslims. And from public school, I was in Newark, New Jersey, where it is pretty much a Black city. And then I went to Florida, which is in the heart of Miami-Dade County, Black students. So I've never really gone to a place that had a diverse student body.
Let me let Imani jump into the conversation. Do you have a couple of questions at this point?
Yes. What was it like? So I went to a very diverse high school. So and then I came to HBCU. So it was like kind of a transition for me. Mm-hmm. So how was it like always going to school with all Black people?
I think if I can reflect now as an adult, I think that what I got to see, especially living in urban populations, is just the contradictions that exist. Like I knew kids who stole cars, and I'm sure that's everywhere. Like I don't want to relegate that to just Black schools, because I know some white kids that are probably boosting cars and stuff like that. But I think just going to schools like that, like you get a more of a, I think, a sister brother type of thing, because I've gone to diverse colleges. I came out of all these schools, and I've gone to Rutgers University, right? And I've gone to a school, institutes, art schools and things like that. And I think when you grow up in a school like the Sister Claire Muhammad School, which is Black Muslim, you go into then public school, and you deal with children who look just like you. I think overall it's very good to see people who look like you. I think you don't have to struggle with a lot of the same insecurities, even though there are some insecurities that jump out because kids can be mean. But like the same with some of the insecurities, like comparing yourself to Rebecca or somebody else, that you get to see yourself in so many different versions.
What advice would you have as far as leadership? You're in charge of a lot of people, for somebody like Imani or a college student, as far as growing leadership skills.
I think all you want to do is instill. I'm still working on that, by the way. I think you always have to work on being a good leader, because we're not taught to be leaders. I wasn't taught to be a leader, right? Like, so I was put into this responsibility because somebody had confidence in me to not only communicate the politics, but now I have to like organize people and get them to do stuff. So I think the major thing is just like really to always instill confidence in the people that you're leading. You want them to emulate you. So you want to be something that's worthy of emulation. You don't want to be a horrible person and like, you need to follow me, but you want to be this great human being, and that can really be kind and sharing, and also can be direct and shaping policy and shaping things. And that's how I want to be. And I want people to emulate that and organize and be a go-getter. So for example, the chairman of our movement, when I first met him, I didn't know who he was, but he came right up to me and started talking to me. How are you doing? And he's he's like the chairman of the entire movement, like throughout the world. And just a very kind person, and just very open and really loving, and just really a good heart. But he also wants freedom for our people, and that's what that's rested in. And I think everything that comes from being a leader is wanting the best for the people that we are leading, and also wanting the best for ourselves.
Just thinking again, talking about if there was a wealth redistribution, how would you deal with people of mixed race, or people that had different types of identifications based on race?
Yeah. In terms of wealth distribution,
and I guess I should ask, how would a wealth distribution like practically work? Like how would how would it work?
Yeah. So I think part of the whole process of restructuring society means that and obviously restructure society to be socialist, because we are against capitalism, and we think that in order to overturn capitalism, you have to have a socialist society, which is about redistribution of wealth, but it's also about workers taking power. And so when we're talking about people who don't have anything, or who may have nothing, and people who do have stuff, like that has to shift. So for example, we have private ownership of companies and industries. And so when we're talking about its public ownership of these industries, they have an input and they can decide what can be made. And also that will require for a shift in society for everybody to be a part of the production process. And right now it's just a small amount of people that get hired based on what the owners of the company want, and they pay them whatever they want. But if we're talking about a place like Africa, which is the center of the world distribution of everything, because that's where everybody is right now. Europe's there, America's there, Asia's there, right now, exploiting and taking all of what Africa has. When we're talking about Africa, there's enough work on the continent of Africa. There's enough resources on the continent of Africa. There's enough people who want what's on the continent of Africa that can pay for the things that we are offering for an industry that will allow for African people to become a part of the production process. So that does a couple of things, right? So now we have all these industries that people are now getting paid to do work from. That takes a lot of people out of poverty. Now we have, we have more equitable education. Because a lot of places on the continent, you have to pay to go to school. In the Caribbean in particular, you have to pay to go to school. And so it's not free education. And just open that up to allow for people to learn and educate themselves. And that also just increases what access people have to resources. And so I think I probably danced around that whole entire thing, but I hope I got to some of the ways that we can start to think about redistribution.
You did. It would be a sort of a taking away of a privatized system. And then the money would be taken from banks and then and then spread around so that it falls equally on everyone.
I don't know if we take it, because I tend to think that capitalist banking industry doesn't have money. They have digits and O's. I think that the real value of wealth is what's already being generated from what's coming out of the ground, right? Like the minerals and diamonds and all these things, the cocoa, the food that's being developed, the water that runs through the dams that power and electrify everything. So now what we're doing is that we're socializing all of these things. We're making it so that it's not just going direct, it's not going this one way out of a place, that is actually expanding and reaching out to every other place. So for example, there shouldn't be a village anywhere in the continent of Africa that doesn't have power. And you open up that whole power question, then you can now open up communication, you can open up travel, you can open up so many different things. There shouldn't be a place in Africa and that doesn't have roads. There's enough cement that's being produced right now in, that's not what roads are made out of, but there's enough, stuff that you can make roads with coming out of Nigeria alone. There shouldn't be a place in Africa where the petroleum is sky high. I went to Sierra Leone one time, and the oil there costs more than it did in Washington, D.C., and they're only 2 clicks away from Nigeria. So the redistribution of wealth means that we have to, all these multinational corporations that currently are exploiting the resources of Africa, now they don't get to do that. And the resources can actually be used to facilitate the uplift of the African population, not just in Africa, but throughout the world.
And then how would it work with like land ownership, private land ownership in our country?
In our country. So I think that, first of all, I think that the question of this country right now is whose land is it anyway? So we're talking about the native population who are constantly struggling around this whole question of the identity and what their rights are to the lands that are being taken away from them. And actually they're being herded towards these small little reservations, and the life on the reservation is horrid. The statistics alone about just the substance abuse and poverty is so dark. And so I think that what that means is that the Native people will have an ability to say, how this land gets redistributed. We don't get to say that because this is not our land. Our land is Africa. I think that we can work with and they can work with us if they wanted to. The Native people of this land can work with anybody they would want to see how we can develop, the land base that is known as America and Canada, and see how people can actually distribute themselves here. But right now, the way that the Native people are living, they're either integrated in overall society, or they're living in reservations or reservation-like areas, which, are really isolated and not the very best conditions. It's ghettoizing the Native people here.
Let me ask you about, before we close off, let me ask you, your colleague mentioned you have a big event coming up, and I want you to be able to tell people about that. And then also let us know how we could go and get some more information about your organization and some of the people that you work with.
Absolutely. So the big event that's coming up is actually next week. We're going to enjoy our 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And this is going to be a time where the party comes together from around the world, where we invite people, no matter who wants to come, to listen to the political report of the African People's Socialist Party, to interact, to hear some of the work that has been going on with all sectors of our party, the African National Women's Organization and some of the other organizations that I mentioned previously. And we had a chance to really just be comrades and just have fun together. So it's really like a great political gathering. And so that's going to be October 6th to the 12th in St. Louis, Missouri, not far from where Mike Brown was killed. But since we've been there since then. Since then, we've done a phenomenal job in that city, and we want to continue to grow and really lift up the Black population there. So this Congress is going to be a part of integrating into, you know, the culture of St. Louis, and the heart of, you know, where the Black Revolution popped off again right here in the United States. And that people can get information on that on apspcongress.org, and you'll see the agenda and how everything is being laid out, who are some of the speakers, and ways that you can participate. And I don't know if we can mention prices. Can we mention prices here?
Absolutely.
Okay, so to get access to the Congress for the whole week, you can pay $200, and that's access to the Congress, and you get food every day. If you just wanted to attend for a day, you pay $35 per day. On the first night, we're going to be having a Black Power masquerade ball and awards banquet to really show appreciation to people who have been in our work and who are outside of our work in the community. And that's $50, and children are always welcome at all of these events.
Well, we appreciate you joining us right here on Bel Air Radio. And thank you for sharing your perspective right here with Imani and I.
One more thing, I forgot to mention that the African National Women's Organization is ANWO, ANWOUHURU.org, and you'll learn a lot more about who the African National Women's Organization is from that website, and all our contact information is there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imani.
All right, thank you. We're going to close off right here on Bel Air Radio.